They thought he didn't belong there. From the moment Jordan Carter pushed open the heavy courtroom doors, it was like the whole room exhaled judgment. Suits turned, eyes narrowed, smirks crept across faces like shadows at sundown. He was just 17. A skinny black boy in a wrinkled blazer 3 sizes too big, clinging to a battered briefcase like it was armor. His sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, the sound cutting through the hush like a challenge. Judge Reynolds sat high on the bench, a man carved from stone. Sharp eyes, sharper words. He peered down at Jordan with that look every melanated child knows too well. The one that says, "You don't belong here, you're out of place." The judge didn't even try to hide the contempt.
This isn't the gymnasium, son. You sure you're not lost on your way to basketball practice?
Laughter broke out, quick, cruel. From the gallery, from the prosecution's table, even from the stenographer trying to keep a straight face. Franklin Moore, the landlord's lawyer, leaned back in his chair, his grin dripping with amusement. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His silence screamed, "This'll be easy." But Jordan didn't flinch. He paused, adjusted his sleeves, and looked Judge Reynolds straight in the eye.
"No, Your Honor. I'm here to defend my mother."
And just like that, the room froze. The judge blinked. Moore stopped smirking. You could hear a pin roll off a desk in the back of the room. Because they weren't expecting that. They expected confusion, silence, maybe even tears. What they got instead was fire. But to understand why that moment mattered, why it hit like thunder, you need to go back. Back before the courtroom. Back to a kitchen table, a folded eviction notice, and a woman who'd already sacrificed everything just to stay afloat. And a boy who refused to let the system swallow her whole. Before the courtroom, before the blazer, before the silence-shattering sentence, there was Angela Carter, a mother, a fighter, a black woman doing everything right, and still getting left behind. Angela worked as a cleaner, 4 buildings, 6 stairwells, and miles of scuffed tile beneath her aching feet. Each morning, she left the house before the sun could warm the windows. Each night, she came home with knees that buckled and hands too swollen to hold a fork steady. But she never complained. Not when her paycheck barely covered groceries. Not when her boss docked her hours without notice. Not even when she found her son sleeping on the couch because the bedroom ceiling had started to leak. Angela just kept going, because that's what mothers like her do. She carried the world on her back and still had room to carry her son's dreams too. Their home was small, a rented unit in a building that had seen better decades. The paint peeled like old memories. The heater rattled like bones in winter. But to Angela, it was more than a roof. It was the last piece of stability she could give her child, until that piece was threatened. One day, Angela came home to find a paper wedged under the door. A notice, cold, final, and cruel. Her name, her address. The words, "Eviction, due to non-payment," stamped like a judgment she never got to defend herself from. She stood there for a long time, the paper shaking in her hand. Her breath caught. Her throat tightened.
"But I paid,"
she whispered. Her voice was soft. Not out of uncertainty, but because of exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from work, but from knowing the system doesn't care how hard you've tried. Jordan rushed to her side, reading the notice with wide, alert eyes.
"This doesn't add up."
But Angela didn't respond right away. She sat down slowly, like her body finally admitted what her heart had known all along. that in a world like theirs, truth isn't enough. Receipts aren't enough. Being right isn't enough when you're black, poor, and alone.
You don't understand. People like us, we don't win. They'll take everything, no matter what we do.
In that moment, Angela wasn't just a mother. She was every woman who's ever felt the walls closing in. Every sister who's ever been told, just be grateful you had anything at all. Every daughter who's been asked to shrink, to stay quiet, to endure. And yet, she looked at Jordan and still tried to be strong, but Jordan saw it, the tremble in her fingers, the quiet in her eyes, the quiet of someone who's been screaming inside for years, and finally ran out of voice. And that's when something shifted. In Jordan, in the room, in the silence between a mother and son. That night, while the city slept, a fire began to grow at the edge of a kitchen table. It started that night. Jordan waited until his mother had gone to bed. She hadn't eaten much, just stared at the eviction notice, folded and unfolded it until the creases split. When the house fell quiet, he pulled out his old laptop, the one with the cracked hinge and flickering screen, and sat at the kitchen table. The eviction notice lay beside him like a dare. He typed, "Tenant rights. How to fight eviction. What makes a notice invalid." The words on the screen were dense, cold, full of legal terms no one had ever taught him. But he didn't back away. He read, then reread, then opened 10 more tabs. By midnight, the kitchen light was the only thing burning in the entire building. Its dull yellow glow pooled around Jordan's face as he scribbled notes on napkins, school papers, the back of a grocery receipt. His eyes strained. His neck ached. But something in him wouldn't stop. Not because he thought he was smart, not because he wanted to prove anyone wrong, but because someone he loved was being hurt, and he couldn't stand by and do nothing. Over the next few days, the kitchen transformed. The table was no longer for meals. It was now a war desk. Stacks of borrowed library books towered like defenses, legal printouts, highlighter marks, hand-drawn timelines, and in the center of it all, Jordan, leaning over pages, lips silently mouthing statutes, tracing his finger along paragraphs as if they were maps leading out of a minefield. Angela watched him from the hallway sometimes, never said much, just stood there, one hand against the wall, the other clutching her chest. She saw his shoulders grow tighter, his posture bend from the weight of too many nights. But she also saw the fire, the same fire that once burned in her before the world tried to put it out. One evening, she walked into the kitchen, her eyes soft.
You don't have to do this, baby. This isn't your fight.
Jordan looked up. His voice was quiet, but sure.
It is now.
And she didn't argue, because in that moment, she knew. This boy wasn't just studying law, he was discovering something inside himself. A courage that books couldn't teach. A strength born from love, not training. A calling deeper than any courtroom title. Late one night, as he flipped through a tenant code manual for the 5th time, a single line stopped him cold. All eviction notices must be notarized by a current, practicing notary public to be legally enforceable. His breath caught. He grabbed the notice, scanned the signature, and typed the notary's name into the search bar. The result blinked back at him like lightning in a storm. Retired 2 years ago. Jordan leaned back, the paper trembling in his hand. He didn't yell, didn't celebrate. He just whispered one word to the empty room.
Gotcha.
It wasn't victory, not yet. But it was something, a thread. And if he could hold on to it long enough, maybe, just maybe, he could pull the whole system apart. But to do that, he'd need more than courage. He'd need to prepare for war. It could have been easy to miss, just a scribble, a crooked signature at the bottom of a page no one wanted to read. But Jordan had read it again and again and again. Something about it had been tugging at him like a thread on the edge of a sweater, small, harmless, until you pull it. That night, he did. He stared at the name printed under the signature, Martha Allen, Notary Public. The handwriting was messy, rushed, like someone wanted it there but didn't want it looked at too closely. Jordan's fingers flew across the keys. He searched state directories, notary registries, public records. The hours slipped by, the sky outside turning indigo. Then he found it. A scanned PDF, official seal. Date, retirement filed, 2 years ago. His breath caught in his throat. The notary who signed his mother's eviction notice hadn't been legally allowed to notarize anything in years. This wasn't just a mistake. It was fraud, and that meant the notice was void. Jordan leaned back slowly in his chair. For the first time in weeks, his hands stopped shaking. He looked at the eviction notice, then at his scribbled notes, then back at the screen. Piece by piece, the system that had tried to push his family into the shadows had left a crack. And now Jordan had found it. He knew this wasn't over, far from it. The landlord's lawyer, Franklin Moore, was seasoned, smooth, and ruthless. He'd bury this detail in paperwork and power plays if he could, but Jordan wasn't afraid anymore, because now he had more than a mother to fight for. He had proof. He started organizing everything, created a timeline, filed copies, bookmarked state laws, wrote summaries on index cards. By sunrise, the kitchen table looked like a command center, and Jordan Carter, 17, black, overlooked, looked like a soldier ready to go to war. Angela walked in, still half asleep, her robe dragging behind her. She froze at the doorway.
What is all this?
Jordan didn't turn around. He held up the paper with the forged notary signature.
It's our way out.
Angela stared at him, unsure whether to believe it, whether to hope. But something in his voice told her maybe this time the ending could be different. Still, Jordan knew evidence wasn't enough. He needed to own the room, control the story, walk into that courtroom not as a scared kid, but as someone the law couldn't ignore. He looked at the blazer hanging on the chair. It still didn't fit. But the fight inside him? That was finally the right size. The day came. Jordan stood at the foot of the courthouse steps, clutching his binder like a shield. His blazer still didn't fit. His hand still trembled just a little. He paused, looked up at the building that had decided the fate of so many like him, and inhaled, not because he wasn't afraid, but because he was, and walked in anyway. Inside, the courtroom was colder than he remembered. The walls, pale and sterile, the rows of benches, filled with strangers whose eyes all said the same thing. He doesn't belong here. Franklin Moore was already seated. Perfect suit, polished shoes. Every motion of his hand said power. He didn't even look up when Jordan entered. Judge Reynolds sat at the bench, flipping through papers like this was just another Tuesday. But for Jordan, this was everything. The bailiff called the court to order. The room settled, and then silence. Jordan stood, all eyes turned. He walked to the defense table, every step echoing like a drumbeat in his chest. Set down his binder, opened it slowly, looked up. His voice, when it came, was steady, but it trembled underneath.
Your Honor, I'm here to prove that the eviction notice served to my mother is not only unfair, but unlawful.
You could hear a cough in the back of the room, a shoe squeak, the hum of the overhead lights. No applause, no support, just silence and scrutiny. Judge Reynolds narrowed his eyes.
You're not a lawyer. Why should I even let you speak?
Because the law should be accessible to everyone, even people like me.
There was a pause, and then the judge nodded. Barely.
Proceed.
Jordan opened his binder, charts, dates, signatures, statutes. Each page was a piece of the wall they'd tried to build around his family, and now he was tearing it down. Franklin Moore finally looked up, smiling, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that says, "This won't take long." He stood, tall, sure, voice smooth like a blade.
Tell me, Mr. Carter, did you find your law degree on YouTube, or was it tucked inside a cereal box?
Scattered laughter rippled through the room, but Jordan didn't laugh, didn't flinch.
I studied every night for weeks, and I'm here because I found something you missed.
Moore's eyes sharpened. He said,
Oh, Zrania. And what might that be?
Jordan held up the eviction notice.
This signature? From a notary who retired 2 years before this was filed.
The courtroom shifted. People leaned forward. Someone murmured. Jordan continued.
This notice is void, and without a valid notice, any eviction is illegal.
Judge Reynolds leaned forward. Moore frowned, and Jordan kept going, line by line, law by law. He wasn't just defending a home, he was defending the right to be heard. But in a system built to silence voices like his, Jordan knew if he wanted to be heard, he'd have to make them listen. Sometimes all it takes is one piece of paper. Jordan stood still, binder open, fingers resting on the document that had kept him up for nights. The courtroom waited. Moore smirked. The judge raised an eyebrow, but Jordan's voice didn't shake this time.
Your Honor, this document was notarized by Martha Allen.
He paused, letting the name settle into the room, then continued.
But according to official state records, Martha Allen retired as a notary public 2 years before this document was signed.
The words hit like thunder, gasps. Chairs creaked, eyes widened. Moore blinked. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The judge leaned forward, expression darkening.
Are you certain of that, Mr. Carter?
Yes, Your Honor. I've attached the certification records. Here's the retirement notice, filed with the state. Date stamped, verified.
The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Angela, seated in the second row, covered her mouth with both hands. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Moore shuffled his papers, clearly rattled.
This is irrelevant, even if there was a clerical error.
It's not a clerical error. It's a fraudulent signature. And by law, that makes the eviction void. Period.
The judge looked down at the documents again, then at Jordan, and for the first time since the trial began, he truly saw him. Not a boy, not a defendant, but a force. The gallery murmured. Someone whispered, "He found it." An older man in the back gave a single nod, slow, proud, deliberate. Moore sat down, his confidence slipping through his fingers like sand, because what was supposed to be a routine case was no longer routine. It had changed, and everyone in that room felt it. Jordan stood there, blazer still too big, shoulders still narrow, but now the room leaned toward him, not away. The power dynamic had shifted, and it started with one piece of paper. But Jordan knew Turning the tide wasn't enough. To win, he'd have to survive the storm they were about to throw his way. The judge leaned back in his chair. Tension hung heavy in the air like the second before thunder breaks. He tapped his pen once, twice.
Mr. Carter, you've made a serious accusation, but law is not just about pointing out flaws. It's about knowing how to stand on solid ground. Let's test that.
Jordan nodded, steady. Binder still open, hand still firm.
Under what statute do you claim this eviction notice is void?
Section 58 of the State Tenant Protection Act. It requires notarization by a practicing certified notary. And case law, State v. Harper, 2008, established that notices signed by invalid agents are considered legally void.
And what about the plaintiff's claim that even if the notice is flawed, unpaid rent still justifies eviction?
Franklin v. Rhodes, 2011. The court ruled that landlords must follow legal procedure. Rent owed does not override due process. If the process begins with a fraudulent notice, everything that follows is unlawful.
Silence. Even Franklin Moore said nothing. He just sat there watching this boy, this kid, recite law like he'd written it. A few heads in the courtroom began to nod, and then something shifted. An elderly woman in the front row, eyes bright, hand on her chest, whispered,
"That boy's speaking for all of us."
A man with a veteran's cap clenched his fist, murmured,
"That's our future right there."
Because this wasn't just about legal language anymore. It was about a child of the community, rising. A young black boy who had every reason to give up, standing tall, calm, brilliant, not just defending his mother, but honoring generations who weren't allowed to speak at all. The judge looked at Jordan again. Longer this time. His face softened, just slightly.
You've done your homework, Mr. Carter.
I had to, Your Honor.
Angela watched from the gallery, both hands covering her mouth. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. Jordan didn't see it. He was focused, eyes on the judge, waiting for the next blow. But what came instead was a pause, and then applause. It started quiet. One clap, then another, then rows of people rising to their feet. Moore tried to protest.
Your Honor, this is highly irregular.
But the judge didn't stop them, because something bigger than protocol had entered the room, and even he felt it. The law had been heard. But more than that, so had the people. And as the applause echoed, Jordan knew. This fight was never just about one family. It was about all the ones who never got a chance to be heard. The gavel fell, one sharp crack that echoed through the room like a release. Judge Reynolds stood, adjusting his glasses, his voice steady, almost reverent.
The court finds in favor of the defendant, Angela Carter. The eviction notice is hereby declared void, and the plaintiff is ordered to compensate the Carter family for wrongful eviction and emotional distress.
Silence. Then movement. Angela gasped. Her hands flew to her face. Her shoulders shook with a soundless sob. Jordan didn't move, not at first. He stood frozen like time itself had stopped to let justice catch its breath. And then an eruption. Applause. Loud, full-bodied, raw. The gallery rose to their feet. Elders, mothers, workers in worn coats and tired shoes. People who'd seen too much and been believed too little. They stood for him. They stood for her. Not just for what Jordan had said, but for what he meant. Because, for once, a black mother didn't lose. For once, a black boy didn't get silenced, mocked, or brushed aside. For once, the system listened. Angela rushed to her son, wrapping her arms around him, clutching him like she could never let go again.
You did it. You really did it.
No, Mama, we did.
Judge Reynolds stepped down from the bench. His voice was quieter now, almost humble.
Mr. Carter, when you walked in here, I didn't see you clearly. I saw my own assumptions, and I was wrong. You showed us what justice can look like, not just for one person, but for everyone the law was meant to serve.
A reporter scribbled furiously. A juror wiped her eyes. Even Franklin Moore stood silently, hands folded, no longer smirking. Because what happened in that room wasn't just a legal victory. It was a shift, a reckoning, a healing. For every person who had ever stood in a courtroom and felt invisible, for every mother who had fought without a voice, for every child who had to grow up too fast just to survive. That day, they were seen. That day, they were heard. And as Jordan stepped outside with the sun warming his face, he knew this wasn't an ending. It was the first page of a brand new chapter.
You sure you don't want to be a lawyer?
Jordan looked at her and smiled, not a boyish grin, but something older, steadier.
One day, but not yet.
What then?
Jordan looked back at the courthouse behind him, at the glass, the marble, the place that once swallowed his hope and now echoed with his voice.
I want to help people. People like us, who don't know where to start, who don't get hurt unless they scream. I want to change that.
Angela didn't say anything. She just squeezed his hand tighter. They walked home together, slowly, quietly, past the buildings where neighbors leaned out their windows to wave, past the corner store where the owner had kept their tab open longer than he should have, back to their little house, the one they'd nearly lost, the one that was still standing. Jordan stepped inside first. Same peeling paint, same creaky floorboard by the fridge. But it felt different now, like the walls had heard what happened and were standing taller because of it. That evening, Jordan sat at the kitchen table. This time, no eviction notice, no legal textbooks, just a clean sheet of paper, blank, open, waiting. He picked up a pen, wrote one line. Today, we stayed, then paused, smiled, and kept writing.